The really strange thing about this 4-week break after the first 3 races is that it kind of feels like the summer break, but just really early in the season, which is a bit odd. Either way, it is still a good chance to take a look at some of the drivers who, after the first 3 races, kind of need to improve when we do come back in Baku in a few weeks' time. Now, the caveat for this video is that it has just been 3 races, so it's still very, very early in the season, but either way, Formula 1 moves very, very fast, and all of these drivers, and I'm going to be talking about 5 drivers in no particular order, by the way, that I think need to improve when we come back in Baku. Maybe because they didn't do a good job, maybe because the team or the car that they're driving, or a combination of the 3 just didn't quite click in the opening 3 rounds, so let's get into it. Right, I've got my list and a few notes with all of the drivers, and I'm going to begin talking, perhaps controversially, about Sergio Perez. Now, I've actually seen in comments when I've previously talked about Checo that I'm being too harsh or too critical on Checo, and yeah, I am being quite harsh on Checo because when you're driving for a top team, when you have the dominant car, and the RB19 is undoubtedly the class of the field, when you're capable of race wins in championships, when you're put on that pedestal, the spotlight and, the critiques are going to be bigger. You're going to be criticized more because there is so much more pressure on you. And I feel like Sergio Perez, although he has made progress and he has talked about, quite recently that he feels a lot more comfortable at the team. He feels like now he is a much more valued driver at the team, and also that he definitely has equal opportunity against Max to fight for the World Championship. But I still think that he needs to improve more, especially after what we saw, from the opening 3 races. I thought, for example, Bahrain, he still finished 11 seconds behind Max at the line. And obviously, with Charles Leclerc retiring, I think that gap potentially would have been even bigger. In Jeddah, obviously, that was a very good race for him, but, Max wasn't really in the picture from qualifying. And then in Australia, whatever happened, because of the crash or whatever caused it, whether it was a brake issue or whether it was his fault, I wasn't that impressed with his kind of drive, fight back through the field, because only coming back to 5th when we had 3, grid starts, which closed the pack up. So if anything, he should have, I think, come back to the podium. I mean, the field got compressed 3 times, which always helps kind of the quicker driver who's making a comeback. To only come back to 5th, I thought was a little bit disappointing, especially when you compare how long he got stuck behind Lando Norris, and then, you look at Max Verstappen up against Lewis Hamilton fighting for the race win, and Max is just flying past Lewis before we even get to the corner. So yeah, it wasn't, in my opinion, given the car that he was driving, a great fight back in Australia either. And so that is why, despite the fact that I think relatively for Red Bull, he's doing a good job kind of supporting Max, the reason why I am quite harsh and quite critical on Checo is because as a fan, I don't mind seeing a dominant car on the grid, but I want to see 2 teammates, push each other to give us kind of at least a little bit of uncertainty in terms of who's going to be the race winner. And at the moment, we're just not getting that, unless something goes wrong for Max, like a reliability issue, something that's out of his control. It is always him winning because Checo just isn't able to put up a fight. And so that is why, even though he has kind of grabbed his first win in Jeddah, I still think that he needs to improve more and push Max more in this dominant RB19 when we do come back for the, last part of the season. The next driver on my list is Logan Sargeant, of course, one of the 3 rookies for 2023 now. Definitely beginning the season, Bahrain, I thought was an incredible debut. I mean, P12 on his debut. Also, an incredible opening lap. I don't know if any of you have seen it. I think he passed maybe 3 or 4 cars in his first lap in Bahrain, so that was incredible. But it all kind of started to kind of fall apart just a little bit in Jeddah. I know he had kind of his lap deleted very, very harshly, but it was his mistake. All of the drivers were told in, the pre-race or the pre-qualifying kind of briefing that, if you cross that white line, your lap is going to be deleted. So that was just a rookie mistake. And ultimately, when the pressure was on him to deliver another lap, because he had it in him, the lap that got deleted would have put him into Q2, but he wasn't able to reproduce it. And that's not delivering under pressure. That was a little bit of a crack. That was a bit of an experience. And he ended up obviously crashing out of that qualifying through frustration more than anything else. And then we saw in Australia, actually, I think the car had genuine pace, and I know that Alex made the mistake as well, but I think that Williams, during a chaotic race, did have a chance for points, but ultimately he was at the back of the grid. So there's been moments of quality, but he hasn't been able to kind of string it all together. So, a solid practice, kind of get his eye in, a good qualifying with no mistakes and kind of, performing well under pressure, and then really kind of stringing together that race as well. He has struggled with, I think, tire wear and kind of, managing the tires during the stints. So, of course, all of this is natural for a rookie. So, it was only natural that he was going to be on this list because he still has loads to improve on, but he can't be, crashing it into the back of De Vries like he did in Australia. He was very lucky and very fortunate, in my opinion, to not, come away with a grid penalty for Baku. I think the FIA actually dropped the ball on that, as I talked about in my video. But yeah, Logan Sargent, I think, definitely has lots to improve on. Totally natural for a rookie. There are glimpses of potential, but he needs to start stringing it together a little bit more over the course of the race weekend. The next driver I'm going to talk about is Nick De Vries, another rookie, of course, for this year. Now, what's really interesting is that in my notes below his name, I have got very anonymous written down because that's kind of how I've felt about him so far. I've barely even noticed him in most of the races, and I suppose you can also kind of take that as a good sign because, sometimes, like I've talked about with Logan Sargent, of course, previously, he crashed into the back of Nick De Vries, and I definitely saw that. So, Nick has not been kind of making massive rookie errors. He hasn't been binning it and kind of, making needless mistakes. But at the same time, let's not forget that this guy is a very experienced racing driver. He's 28 years old. He's, of course, a world champion in both Formula E and also Formula 2 as well. So he is used to winning races and championships and driving for manufacturer teams when, the pressure is very, very high. So I expected him, the kind of preconceptions about Nick De Vries before he even, came into Formula 1 is that this guy is an experienced driver. We don't expect to judge him like, a regular rookie, and I expected him to hit the ground running a lot better than he has so far. I mean, the average gap between him and Yuki Tsunoda in qualifying has been over 4/10 during the first 3 qualifying sessions, and, I mean, of course, on one hand, he is not being helped at all by AlphaTauri because they have arguably one of the worst cars, either the 9th or the 10th worst car on the grid, and also some of the characteristics of that car as well, I think he's also finding difficult. So there's a lot of factors for Nick De Vries. I don't think he's done a good job. I really did expect that, with his experience and after what we saw last year, that he would actually just be straight out of the box really, really fast and kind of much closer to Yuki than he has been. So yeah, it has been a surprise for me, but again, there's also kind of a lot around his seat as well because I don't think his place in AlphaTauri is, anywhere near secured, especially when you look at the fact that Yuki Tsunoda has really stepped it up in 2023. Liam Lawson has just won on his Super Formula debut, and also, of course, Iwasa, another Red Bull Junior, is, of course, atop of the F2 standing. So, De Vries is massively under pressure to even keep his seat, looking at all of the other Red Bull Juniors that want to be in Formula 1. So, yeah, there's a lot of pressure on him. I haven't been massively impressed. Again, that's not all his fault. I know it's also down to AlphaTauri as well, but he is definitely a guy that needs to improve because he is under pressure for 2024 to keep his seat. And next up, I have got Kevin Magnuson. Now, believe you me, this is not a driver that I was expecting to talk about, to be honest, as someone who I think needs to improve. I mean, I definitely did not see this coming, but I think you have to look at the context of what happened last year when obviously he kind of had the edge over Mick Schumacher, especially in the early part of the season when the Haas was still a very good car, still capable of scoring points, and he really did have Mick kind of in his pocket. Now, I think towards the end of the season, it was a lot closer than a lot of people kind of realized, but by then I think it was too late for Mick, and the car wasn't kind of good enough to score points, so no one was actually seeing when Mick Schumacher was doing a better job than K-Mag, and so going into the season with Nico Hülkenberg, an experienced, established driver coming into the team, I think part of the reason why Haas kind of wanted to bring Nico in is that I think they themselves weren't sure how good of a job K-Mag was doing, and they wanted to bring in an established, experienced driver to really kind of, push K-Mag all the way and kind of really, make sure that he's not taking the seat for granted and kind of, stat padding up against Mick Schumacher. And ultimately, I think K-Mag is kind of, being found out a little bit in these first 3 races. And I have been surprised, massively by Hülkenberg especially in qualifying, because so far during the first 3 qualifying sessions, Hulkenberg on average has been over half a second quicker than K-Mag, which is something I definitely did not expect. I mean, to be honest, going into the season, I thought, maybe K-Mag would have the advantage over Hulk in qualifying, but then during the races, the fact that K-Mag can be a bit erratic and, he can crash a few times as well. We've seen that last year. We've seen it, obviously, this season already. That's where I thought the calm ahead of Nico Hulkenberg would just that's what would get him a bit closer to K-Mag in the races, but no, I mean, so far Hulkenberg has dominated K-Mag in quali and also been, less erratic, and had that incredible finish in Australia as well of a P7 finish, and maybe could have been on the podium had it not have been for that countback restart and, of course, a Sainz's penalty as well. So, yeah, I mean, massively surprising to see K-Mag kind of on the back foot to start the season, but listen, this guy is still a quality driver. This is the guy that set pole position last year at Sao Paulo, so he's got plenty of natural raw talent and speed, but he needs to kind of calm down a little bit. That crash in Australia is not good for the team, especially, during this cost gap era. He needs to also be more consistent, because we know that he can be erratic, but yeah, he's got all of the qualities to be a good midfield driver. I'm actually happy that Nico Hulkenberg is pushing him, because I feel it's much more healthier for that team to have 2 drivers kind of pushing each other. But certainly coming back to this kind of middle portion of the season, K-Mag needs to step it up against a returning Nico Hulkenberg. The last driver on my list will come as no surprise to those of you that have seen the thumbnail for this video, and that is Charles Leclerc. Now, put it simply, 2023 has been his worst start to a Formula 1 season since his rookie year in 2018, and this is not necessarily so much about Charles, but as a team, as a collective, Ferrari have let him down yet again. Yet again, they have not given him a good enough car, and after that early season, that Bahrain reliability retirement, that was just a total gut punch, especially given the context of all of the reliability issues that they had in 2022. And ultimately, even though he had kind of an okay Jeddah, even though his qualifying, I think, has been very, very good, but we expect that with Charles. I've said on my channel before that, and I think I've said this on Twitter as well, I think over 1 lap, he is the quickest guy in Formula 1 over 1 lap. And so that raw pace, that raw speed, it's always going to cover up in qualifying some of the deficiencies that the Ferrari car has. And so, yeah, however, in the races, they are just not there. Their tyre wear just hasn't been there as well. They've really struggled on that part. And then when it comes to Australia, I mean, that crash that he had on lap 1, that was just, I think, frustration more than anything else, starting down kind of further down that he's used to, especially after 2022, getting caught up in that kind of 3-into-2 scenario with Stroll and Alonso. Ultimately, he came off worse, and I think looking at that incident, it was a racing incident, but I do pin more of the blame on him, and I'm sure that he looked back at that and thought, I wish I'd just given Stroll a bit more space. But I think that crash came out of frustration, after a bad qualifying where the team tried a really strange kind of DRS train with him and Sainz, and that clearly didn't work out, surprise, surprise for Ferrari. I think he was left frustrated. I think that lap 1 was almost like, I've got to make up, I've got to make up positions right now. This is my best chance because I'm already way further back down. So yeah, it's just been a frustrating start to the season when you're talking about, whether you're talking about the reliability issues, whether you're talking about the crash in Australia, and ultimately, sitting at the moment, where is he, P8 in the championship behind Hulkenberg, is just, yeah, it's just not good enough. So it's definitely a case of where he needs to improve, along with the team, of course. I'm not saying that Charles is not doing a good enough job, but both as a collective, both him and the team need to improve when they come back, because there is still a lot of racing to go, and there is still plenty that he can achieve. Maybe he can get some race wins, but I think what's really unfortunate and what's frustrating for me is that there is still loads of races to go, but even after 3 races, we know that he's not going to be in the title fight. Yet again, I find myself with loads of other fans talking about, well, maybe next year is the year where Ferrari will finally give him a good enough car. But yeah, it's certainly been a very frustrating and a really disappointing start yet again to 2023. And he has got both him and Ferrari especially have a lot of making up to do. Well, there you have it. That is my list of 5 drivers in no particular order that need to improve most after the first 3 races. Let me know your list of drivers in the comments box below. And if you did enjoy the video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe as well. That would be massively appreciated. And I'll see you in the next one.